an honor and a pleasure to be here. I came a bit late, so perhaps I had missed some of the introductions. I'm not sure if all of you can see me, and if you wish not to see me, that's perfectly fine too. You can seek shelter behind the pillar. But I'm curious, what sort of vintages of PGPs do we have in the room? So let me just begin by asking, how many of you are from the 2010 decade? Anyone here from the 2010 decade? Last 5 years? Okay, so you're one. Which class? Okay. How many from the 2000 decade? Okay. How about the 90s? 80s? Okay, and it's gonna thin out at this point. How about the 70s? Yeah, I should count myself. I know Girish from my batch is here, at least. How about the 60s? Anyone? I know Professor Rakesh Serene is here. He stepped out, but I'm meeting him after almost 30 years. So it's a pleasure and truly an honor to be here. And thank you, Ashima, for including me in the program. I thought I've been mostly an educator, at least my professional life, so I'd offer some reflections on management education, both in India and the US, and perhaps say a bit about what we can learn from each other. But I think it's sort of an axiom that almost all of us carry a degree of gratitude and respect for the institution that enabled us to pursue the professional pathways that we have managed to pursue in life. My own path to academia has been substantially the result of serendipity and a sequence of fortunate outcomes, but it simply wouldn't have been possible were it not for the passage through IIM. But even at IIM, I didn't aspire to be an academic. And in fact, I think Girish and others can attest to this, I was probably regarded by my classmates as the one least likely to become an academic. So at the risk of perhaps overtaxing your indulgence, I'll just offer a brief autobiographical note. I was born and raised in the small towns of Madhya Pradesh, to which my grandparents had emigrated from West Punjab when partition came. My university education in Indore, though I had some wonderful teachers, but largely it took place amidst an institutional culture of mediocrity, indifference, and inaptitude that continues to plague these institutions to this day and continues not to serve its students. And as I look back at my origins, my antecedents, with a sense of improbability, it's obvious to me that if it were not for the fluke by which I got into IIM Ahmedabad, the only kid in my class from the entire undivided state of Madhya Pradesh, my opportunities in life would have been substantially truncated. So as I look back and look at our country now that stands on the cusp of sustained and substantial economic growth, with a collective sense of optimism and self-confidence not seen in our society for at least the last 350 years, I see education as a critical determinant of India's future, and how well we seize the opportunity created by India's momentum of the last 2 decades, how well we reap the demographic dividend that we have inherited, and keep this tryst with destiny that our founding fathers promised us, will depend greatly on how well we educate our young people. This is the simple lesson of history, from the European Renaissance to the ascendance of America in the last century, and now to the spectacular growth that you see in many parts of Asia. And in India, we now have almost all the ingredients that make nations and societies great. Perhaps the most important among them is the freedom we enjoy to disagree, to doubt, to dissent, Lately, this seems to have come under some stress, but by and large, the society remains tolerant of differences, and there is a healthy profusion of cultural diversity. What Tiger spoke about, I think, is tremendously important. And when these attributes of a society are underpinned by good education and economic opportunity, they create a fertile ground for creativity and innovation, something that, again, Tiger spoke a great deal about. From my distant vantage point, I see many reasons for optimism in India, but I also see some challenges ahead. So the first thing I'll mention, it might be a little unorthodox, perhaps controversial. And so as I look back at this somewhat strange system by which elite in Indian universities admit their students, I find it quite remarkable that elite Indian universities and also branches of the civil service have developed in their post-independence history an almost absurdly pure meritocracy, whose existence in a society still rife with corruption and graft is all the more surprising. As you know, since you've all gone through it, a necessary condition for admission to these institutions is a very high score. It tends to be now in the 99.7th percentile. I suspect it's safe to say that most of us would have struggled with that threshold. So it keeps getting more competitive. But looking at it from the American perspective, the system appears quaint at best, or narrowly unidimensional. Indeed, one may question whether the ability to solve contrived mathematical puzzles rapidly, for instance, on the CAT exam for the IIMs, predicts the candidate's ability to manage large corporations, create new enterprises, be an effective leader. But despite its reliance on a narrow assessment of skills, the system does have at least two compelling virtues, both perhaps unintended and I suspect not fully appreciated. So I'll claim that the first virtue is that the system's reliance on quantifiable, objective, and anonymous measurement is precisely what makes it impervious to any influence of money or politics. This imperviousness is astonishing in the Indian context. Imagine that these processes included subjective assessments of personal qualities such as leadership potential, interpersonal skills, creativity, etc., that American universities use for nearly all academic programs. Kanya, the next speaker, graduated from Yale, and I think she'll agree that the process by which students are admitted is much more holistic. It looks at many, many attributes of the candidate. But if we were to do that in India, so my hunch is that if we open the door in India, even slightly, to these subjective assessments, you run the risk of caving in to all kinds of undue influences. It is true that elite universities and civil services in India also use interviews and some other subjective assessments in the final stages of selection, but the first screen, the necessary but insufficient condition for entry, is essentially completely objective. So the selection processes and their outcomes are also remarkably transparent. The numerical cutoffs are made public, often separately for the various reservation categories, as are the lists of those who make the cut, often in rank order. Faculty and administrators guard the tests like state secrets, knowing that the slightest suspicion of leakage or of improper test administration creates a national scandal. Thus, objectivity, transparency, and the high stakes of outcomes make the system remarkably robust. The second virtue, I claim, is this. Though the tests apparently don't measure leadership, entrepreneurial, or creative abilities, many graduates present right here in this room of these technical and professional institutes such as the IITs, IIMs, and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences have nevertheless excelled in endeavors that lie well beyond the institute's respective professional domains. A plausible explanation of this success is that while the ability to solve mathematical puzzles does not constitute visionary leadership. There is a common underlying personality trait that helps one succeed both in the narrow technical entrance tests and in the wider domains of leadership. That trait, if you buy my thesis, is hard work, determination, and the will to overcome difficult odds and competition. So the narrow admission tests indirectly and inadvertently also end up measuring willpower and grit, which probably matter much more to many endeavors than a narrow mathematical ability. Moreover, being admitted to these institutions creates a powerful affirmation of talent, and society begins to open doors of opportunity in expectation of that talent. Now, regardless of whether I'm right about the virtues I have claimed, I suspect there is more agreement about the immeasurably powerful democratizing influence of these institutions in a society still riddled with inequities based on caste, religion, and economic class differences. India's elite education institutions have created enormous social mobility. There's much evidence of that, and opportunities for underprivileged kids. And though parental wealth does determine the student's access to good schooling and test preparation, raw talent can and does often prevail despite poor schooling. Now, of course, there are downsides to the system as well, especially in the emotional toll that it takes on kids who try hard but don't succeed. Test preparation can also become so ritualized that it supplants real education. These problems undoubtedly exist, but are caused by a shortage of high-quality institutions rather than the processes they deploy for admission. The solution, therefore, requires the creation of more high-quality institutions, not the re-engineering of admissions processes. There is another implication. For perfectly understandable reasons, we nurture a healthy desire in India to make universities and public institutions more inclusive and accessible to underprivileged and underrepresented peoples. The challenge is to ensure that the well-intentioned efforts to engineer